Hey, welcome back to the old haunt, friend, and a happy Flag Day to you. You know, they designed this flag in 1777, but only started celebrating it 100 years later. But you know what? That's why I have such high hopes for this show, friend. Trust me, it's gonna be huge. That's right, Chester. Patience. Anyway, come on in. Tales to tell and all that. Unrelated, anyone know how to kill off a ghost? Ooh, it's the Crimson Hour here at the Weekend Abode, so we better get started, cause when that last lick of life fades away, it's gonna be you, me, and whatever's waiting in these walls for the lights to go out. Our tale tonight is brought to you by author Frederick Pangbourne. Frederick is no longer with us, but while he was, he wrote his ass off, and we mean to keep his legacy alive. This one's a supernatural horror story with a little twist of sci-fi. So without further delay, from our old pal Frederick Pangbourne, I give you One Night at Jipp's. How many buckets? I asked again as I passed the joint to Earl on my right. 3. He replied before taking a long pull off it and passing it to Lucy on his right.
What were they again?
She asked as she carefully took the joint from his fingers. Crawdads. 3 buckets of 'em. Came in first place, I did, he stated proudly as he reached down for the bottle of beer nestled between his legs. My brow furrowed at the thought of Earl polishing off 3 buckets of crawdads in one sitting, and I leaned forward, looking him up and down. His long dark hair was tied back in a ponytail, and a bottle of beer was plugged into his mouth behind a scraggly beard. Earl was 36 and 150 pounds soaking wet, on a good day. I shrugged it off and decided not to question the unlikely matter any further.
I hope you're not selling that line of bullshit, Earl. Because I ain't buying it,
proclaimed Lucy as she tried holding in the smoke while reaching over Earl to pass me the joint. I could see Earl was not amused by her comment, and I decided to defuse a possible quarrel. I don't know. Earl can be full of surprises. Ain't that right? I added, relieving her of the smoke. You're damn straight I am, he said before he pulled from his bottle again. Lucy was 42, and if I may be so bold, she had seen better days, no disrespect intended. You could tell that she led a hard life of drinking and smoking when she was younger, wearing her face out with premature wrinkles and a slightly haggard look. It was a shame. If you look at her closely, it was easy to see she must have been very attractive when she was younger, with her long red hair and green eyes. Earl and Lucy were both employed at Jipp's, with me, J.T., being the sole proprietor of the small bar nestled away from the beaten path. I had been running Jipp's for a good 8 years now, with Earl acting as a short-order cook and Lucy helping me with the bartending and waiting on the few tables we had. Despite their quirks, they were good folk all in all. My complaints about them were far and in between. It was a Tuesday night, and the local crowd had been minimal, so after closing up, the 3 of us decided to sit out back on the dock and get stoned as we observed the full moon. Jipp's was on the outskirts of town and was secretly located off a winding section of Route 411. If someone was passing by fast enough, they'd missed a hand-painted sign I made and posted on the corner of our driveway. The dirt driveway indiscreetly left the main road and briefly snaked down through the wooded surroundings before opening into the tiny gravel parking lot in Ridgeway Lake. It was here that the bar sat at the lake's edge with a small dock constructed behind it. Tonight, the 3 of us sat on decrepit lawn chairs, toking away over some cold beers and gazing up at the moon rising over the distant hills that encircled the lake. I imagine this must be what retired people experienced on a regular basis, and I can safely say that at that moment, The three of us did not have a worry in the world. I was preparing to bring up an amusing story regarding a drunk customer who had pissed himself last week when my attention was unintentionally diverted by a distant yet brilliant flash in the night sky. As I was focused on the light's point amongst the stars, I said nothing to the others. From where the flash had originated from, a far-off streak of light was descending. I realized I was witnessing a shooting star or some type of meteorite. I pointed up at the celestial display. "Will you look at that? It's a shooting star or something," I said as if educating my peers. Lucy and Earl ceased their chit-chatting and gazed up to where I pointed. The object was falling from the night sky at an astonishing rate, and we did the expected oohs and ahs as it neared with its brilliant illuminating display. Then, before either of us could speak, it crashed into the far bank, failing to burn up in the atmosphere as most meteors tend to do. Its impact resulted in a muffled explosion of a green showering of sparks as it struck the sandy earth of the lake's edge. It reminded me of one of those detonated phosphorus grenades you see in those Vietnam War movies. "Did you just see that?" a slack-jawed Earl asked.
"I have eyes, don't I?"
replied Lucy. "Jesus Murphy!" I exclaimed, nearly dropping my beer. Even from our far distance, at the opposite end of the lake, one could make out a burning green fire where the meteor, or whatever it was, had crashed. As we stared in awe, the flames dwindled, leaving behind only a faint fluorescent glow of emerald in its place. "Earl, run inside and grab a six-pack from the cooler behind the bar," I said as I stood from my lawn chair. "We need to see what's afoot." "What the hell for?" he replied as he struggled to stand up on intoxicated legs. "I want to take the boat over there for a better look. Gonna need us some cold ones for the ride." I was already making my way to the small dock where I had a 12-foot dinghy tied up.
"JT, I'm not going out on that thing,"
Lucy stated.
"You know I can't swim, and you two are in no condition to be on the water."
Earl, upon hearing her statement, paused halfway to the bar's back door, awaiting further orders. "Horse shit!" I shouted over my shoulder and turned around. "Earl, never mind her. Go on and get them beers." I then directed my attention to Lucy. "I wasn't going to drag you out there, Luce. We know you can't swim. Only taking Earl. I just want to get a closer look and take some pictures. Post them on the internet or something. How often does one get to witness something like that?" She shrugged.
"Probably the only time in my life I'll ever see anything like that."
"Exactly," I exclaimed as I took a knee at one of the dock pylons and started to unsecure the line. "You just hang out and continue embalming yourself. We'll be back in a few." I looked up at the sound of clanking bottles and saw Earl hobbling toward the dock with the beers and Lucy behind him giving me the finger. With the boat untied, I carefully climbed inside and held on to the dock as Earl attempted the same, while nearly falling off. "Careful now. Watch them beers," I instructed as he eventually made his way in and sat at the bow. "Want me to drive this fucker?" he asked as he tried to make himself comfortable. "I got it," I replied as I started up the small 4-horsepower outboard engine and guided us away from the dock and out onto the lake. I had a good buzz going as we made our way across the lake and wished I had brought some smoke along as the beers were already on the verge of depletion. The full moon made the lake's surface appear as smooth as glass beneath its light as we slowly continued past the halfway point. The greenish glow was still very much visible as we drew closer, and it was a perfect point of reference in the darkened night. "We almost there?" Earl asked, craning his neck to look behind him since he sat facing me. "Just about." "What do you think it was, JT?" "I reckon it was a meteorite." I finished my beer and slid it into the cardboard carrier with the other empty bottles. Never heard of them glowing like that, though. That's why I want to take a few pictures. Shit, I might even take a video instead. Maybe sell it to the news or something. I cut the engine about 100 feet offshore and turned the boat so it sat parallel to the land, giving both Earl and I a clear view of what awaited us. About 15 feet from the water's edge, a shallow crater had been created where the object in question had crashed. Whiffs of white smoke rose from the surrounding scorched earth. It was what sat in the crater's center, however, that had our undivided attention. I don't know what else to call it besides what it appeared to be. A plant. A giant plant. Long, massive tropical palm leaves sprouted out from the enormous bulbous base and fanned out the length of a man. Standing erect from the plant's center rose a tall, pointed purple bulb covered in short, thick thorns. The eerie emerald glow still resonated off the plant like a lingering form of some type of radiation, like what they depicted in the old Saturday morning cartoons back in the day. The thought of being exposed to any potentially lethal dose of energy hadn't entered my mind as I continued taking in the sight of this alien organism. I now noticed that from its hefty base several fibrous tendrils, presumably roots, stretched out a dozen feet or so over the surrounding area, anchoring the plant in place. Near the water's edge, however, the roots were much thicker and reached out deep into the lake's still waters. "Jesus Murphy," I muttered at the inconceivable sight. "What the hell is that?" Earl followed. "I'm not quite sure, Earl. My eyes refusing to pull their gaze from the thing. But if I were to take a stab in the dark, I'd say it was some kind of alien plant. Must have come from that meteorite." "That big? That thing's as big as a small car, JT. How'd it get so big so fast?" My eyes now wandered over the excessively large roots that fed into the lake. I wondered how far they stretched out over the lake bed beneath us. Maybe once those roots got into the water, it fed it. The water from our planet acting like some superfood or something. As the words fell from my lips, I realized my guess sounded like that of some geeky child who watched too many monster movies. I soon realized that the geeky child was me, some 30 years ago, giving his honest assessment. "Christ on the crutch," whispered Earl. "You still gonna take a picture of it?" "You damn right I am. Then we'll get back to the bar. I don't like that glowing. Could be some kind of radiation," I said as I began fishing out my cell phone. "Radiation?" I heard Earl quietly repeat. My phone was now in my hands and the camera app turned on. As I was holding it up and trying to center the picture, I watched through the screen as the giant bulb in the plant's center suddenly opened like a blooming flower. Except for being composed of a soft, delicate tissue of an appealing color, the interior was a bright, sickly red, like exposed flesh, and filled with teeth-like points resembling the heads of sharp spears. I lowered the phone from my face at the sudden display of savagery in time to hear a long, bellowing roar erupt from the apparent mouth of the plant. The unexpected sound caused me to flinch, and the phone fell from my fumbling fingers. As if in slow motion, it dropped onto the edge of the boat and bounced up in a somersaulting manner before plunging into the lake's black waters. "Fuck! JT, look!" I looked up from my departed phone into where Earl was pointing out onto the lake near the boat. At first I saw nothing on the smooth surface of the moonlit waters. Then as my eyes adjusted, I made out several shapes on the water's surface. Dark round shapes protruding from below. It took only a matter of seconds before I realized they were heads. Partially surfaced heads were poking up from below and watching. Tiny glints of green, acting as eyes, stared at the two of us. And as I watched them watching us, more heads were now surfacing around the boat. "They're all over the place!" I heard Earl cry out, and without hesitating, I started the boat engine. I had turned the boat so sharply and abruptly that I damn near tossed Earl overboard. As I pushed the tiny engine for everything it was worth, concentrating on the faint lights behind the bar in the far distance, I scarcely heard him as he continued babbling incoherently. The man, like myself, had been literally scared out of his wits. Whatever buzz I had coming here had abruptly withdrawn, leaving me stone cold sober and shaken. I think that's what rattled me the most. Sure, that plant was terrifying as all hell, but it was the last thing I expected to find out there. A giant plant from space having a gaping mouth with teeth. And to make matters even more frightening, it roared. And loud. What the hell kind of plant can do that? None from this planet, that's for sure. Then there were the heads. It was like there were people coming up from under the water. What the hell was that all about? My childhood imagination then conjured up a horrifying vision. Instead of humanoid bodies lurking under the calm waters, what if those heads were attached to some kind of tentacle or root instead, being used as visual receptors, acting as eyes for the thing? A shiver ran up my spine at the grisly image, and I concentrated on the task at hand, getting us back to Jipp's. The inadequate boat motor made our trip back seem like an eternity, but the matter was beyond my control. The small engine was designed for cruising about, not high-speed getaways. Earl had finally quieted down and sat leaning on the side of the bow, watching the waters behind us as we retreated. When we did eventually arrive at the dock, Lucy was absent, leaving the 3 empty lawn chairs to greet us. Instead of taking the time to slow the boat down and dock it properly, I drove the fucker right up on the land, tilting the motor up just before we ran aground. The impact damn near sent Earl and me flying from the boat before it skidded to a halt. Tripping over the scattered beer bottles rolling about on the floor of the boat, I hurried over the side and grabbed a hold of Earl, who was still shaking from both the side at the other end of the lake and our crash landing. As we scurried up the bank and made our way to the back door of the bar, I threw a glance over my shoulder at the water. I didn't bother telling Earl that just off the shore, several heads were already poked up from the water, observing us with those glinting green eyes, while others were surfacing as I watched. I only pulled him along harder. The sheet metal encased back door was ajar, and when I entered with Earl hanging on my shoulder, I slammed it closed behind me and secured the 2 heavy deadbolts on both the top and the bottom. No sooner had I locked the door than the pounding on the opposite side started. A rapid succession of hammering, as if something outside had just missed gaining entry and was not happy. I steadily backed away, watching the door as if it would not stand the assault. Satisfied that it was more than capable of holding fast, I turned and walked into the bar as soon as the pounding ceased. Earl was seated at a table with his head in his hands. I imagined he was still trying to wrap his mind around what he had just seen. I gave him a pat on the shoulder as I walked past and did a quick scan of the bar's interior, including making sure the front door was locked. Lucy was not present. "Lucy!" I shouted as I made my way behind the bar and pulled a bottle of Jack Daniels off the shelf and filled up 2 shot glasses. "Lucy!"
What the hell are you shouting for? Christ almighty, JT.
She replied as the door to the women's room opened and she appeared. "Earl, come on over here and get a shot. It'll calm your nerves," I called out as I quickly polished off a shot and promptly poured another.
Well?
She inquired as she bellied up to the bar. "Well, what?" I said after downing another whiskey.
Did you take a picture of that meteorite or whatever it was?
"No," was all I replied, and leaned across the bar and peered at Earl. He was sitting there dumbfounded, staring blankly into space. "Earl, snap out of it and get your ass over here."
What the hell is going on? What's wrong with Earl? What?
A sudden barrage of pounding on the front door cut her next question short. I damn near dropped the shot glass I was holding at the sudden noise. The front was not coated in sheet metal like the back. It was as heavy as it was thick, and like the rear door, easily withstood the hammering, though. The three of us watched wide-eyed as the door vibrated wildly. Suddenly, the assault stopped as quickly as it had begun, and I glimpsed a shadow glide by the front window where the neon Pabst Blue Ribbon sign hung. Though I hadn't the foggiest clue as to what had emerged from the lake behind us and was now trying to enter the bar, I knew that whatever it wasn't coming in through the doors. The only window in this joint, though, that was another story. Something moved near me, and it startled me from my observant thoughts. It was Earl. He had silently crept from his seat and was now at the bar, clutching its edge with whitened knuckles as his eyes stayed fixed on the front door. My gaze drifted to Lucy. She was staring blankly at me. I can't explain that. Kind of, I stammered.
Okay, I'm listening.
Well, you're not going to believe this, but space plant. Earl interjected as he reached for the filled shot glass I had poured from him earlier with a shaking hand. It's grown into the lake.
What the hell is he talking about, JT?
She inquired after throwing Earl a skeptical glance. I refilled both our shot glasses before I got into any form of explanation. There was some kind of giant plant out there, on the shore where that meteor or whatever it was landed. We think it's using the lake to grow bigger.
What were you two smoking out on the boat? Who's outside?
Was her reply. Before I could answer, Earl had polished off his shot and slammed the glass on the bar before reaching for the bottle. He ain't lying. He was now filling up another shot with a quaking hand. It's here now. It grew across the lake, and now it's here. Why I had not acted on this as soon as I walked in the back door was beyond me. Taking the bottle from his trembling hand, I poured Earl and myself one more shot before I pulled my car keys from my pocket and then slammed them on the bar. Let's get the fuck out of here. This ain't the time for talking. We can do that when we're on the road and far from here. Earl's eyes widened. Yeah, let's get the hell out of here, JT. Before I could agree or disagree with his plan of action, which I planned on doing anyway, he had snatched the keys from the bar and was quickly making his way to the front door while thumbing through the key ring. Whoa! Earl, wait! I shouted, before I did another quick shot at Jack and tossed the glass aside. It was too late, though, like I really needed to pour another quick, unnecessary shot before leaping into action. By the time I made it around the bar and halfway across the floor, Earl had already found the key and was unlocking the door and removing the deadbolts. I shouted out his name, but by the time I was at his back, the door had its locks undone and he was pushing it wide open. I squinted as a gust of warm air blew in and brushed a hair from my face, and I watched as Earl turned around to face me in a mixture of panic and excitement. I peered over his shoulder and could see mine and Lucy's cars parked at the far side of the parking lot, a lone street light illuminating the two vehicles. It was then that something rose from behind Earl, his body still twisted at the waist as he looked at me. What that thing was that greeted us at the door was hard to put into words, at least none that I could gather with any proper or accurate description. It looked like a human skull, but with odd abnormalities and deformities. There was no opening for a nasal passage, nor a mandible, only a smooth plate where there should have been teeth. The tiny green specks of light were alive in the black recesses of the overly large eye sockets. Below the misshapen skull was a tangled mess of squirming, twisting, vine-like tendrils that had attached themselves to the skull and clung to it like muscle tissue. It was all I could make out, with Earl blocking its entire form, and before it suddenly sprang onto him. Like some multi-armed octopus, the tangled mass erupted into long, writhing appendages that wrapped tightly around Earl in an instant, encasing him in its embracing vines. Earl screamed, and beyond the doorway, more shapes rose, and some rapidly assisted in latching onto him. With no tangible thought, I turned and ran from the open doorway back into the bar. Lucy stood like some petrified tree, sporting the same dumbfounded look Earl wore earlier. I grabbed her by the arm and pulled her after me as I headed to my office in the back room. Once inside the tiny office, I turned and locked the door, which to my delight I had reinforced some time back with an oversized deadbolt installed. "Hang tight, Luce," I said as I flopped into the shoddy swivel chair at my desk. "Police'll be here before you—" I lifted the dead receiver to my ear, and after tapping the switch knobs rapidly with no response, I looked down at the wire leading from the phone. Someone had ripped it from the junction box in the wall. What the— Outside the door, I could hear tables and chairs being turned over and glass shattering. Those things had made their way into the bar and were searching for us. I looked up to Lucy, still holding the broken, frayed end of the phone cord. "You?" Lucy said nothing as she stood by the door, staring at me with an emotionless look. The damage to the inside of the bar continued and grew louder until those nameless horrors had found the door and began their barrage of poundings. Though I now knew that they did not possess the physical strength to come through the door, I felt no security. I rose slowly from the chair, meeting Lucy's glazed-over stare. "Why, Lucy? Why?" Instead of some verbal response, she only stared at me through those glassy dead eyes and unemotional face as her hand gradually rose to the bolt in the door. I opened my mouth in protest, but before I produced a sound, Lucy's face shifted, and a trickle of blood ran from her hairline and down across her face. Then, like a banana being peeled, the flesh of her head began to separate in wide, bloodied strips and peel off, exposing the abomination beneath. I could only stammer incoherently at the unexpected terror and fell back into my chair. Her flesh and hair had now slipped away from the malformed alien skull. It reminded me of the space plant when its leaves initially opened up, revealing the gaping maw inside, another unexpected sight. As her fingers fell on the deadbolt and pulled it back with an audible snap, the pounding suddenly ceased. My body felt numb and frozen as it refused any mental commands my brain shouted out. Even when the door was slowly being opened and the skull continued its unbreaking stare, I wondered at what point these things had reached Jipp's, and when they had taken Lucy, and what had become of her and Earl. As the last of Lucy's flesh fell away from it in a bloody heap, exposing the tangled mass underneath, and those things crept into the room, I closed my eyes and prayed that whatever end was to come, that it would be painless. And that was One Night at Jipp's by author Frederick Pangbourne. A good reminder that curiosity killed the cat, the cook, the bartender, and probably the bar owner too. A little about the author. Frederick Pangbourne was a short story author with over 100 stories to his credit, and the majority of them in publication. He was a retired law enforcement officer and former U.S. Marine. And again, a special thanks to his brother, Robert Pangbourne, who's partnered with us to keep Frederick's legacy going. Robert himself is an amazing artist who we hope you'll check out. You can find him on Facebook as R.F. Pangbourne, simply spelled Pangborn. Check out the show notes for a link to his Instagram. His paintings are horrifying. Thanks, Robert. And thanks, Fred. Gone but not forgotten. The Crimson Hour is a production of the Sinister Somnolence Network. All narration and audio production by yours truly. Co-produced by Geoff Sturtevant. You can follow me on Facebook for news and upcoming releases on both this show and Drew Blood's Dark Tales, my Friday night show on Chillin' Tales for Dark Nights. I hope to see you there too. But hey, while we're here, please hit all those obligatory buttons and share if you don't mind. We'd really appreciate it. The Crimson Hour is accepting submissions. If you've got a story or two you'd like to be featured on this show, send it to drewbloodhorror@gmail.com. If selected, you'll get the full treatment. Well, the Crimson Hour's over, and you know what that means. Things are about to get dark around here. First, though, I'd like to thank two very special listeners, Land Cooper and Monkey Man. Land Cooper writes, I love the show, listened to every episode since season 1. When I found out there was a weekend show, I added this to my regimen as well. And Monkey Man writes, loving the stories, listen every chance, keep doing a great job. And he thinks I should name the ghost Randy. What do you think about that, Randy? Inconclusive. But a big thanks to Land Cooper and Monkey Man. And remember, if you'd also be so kind as to add a review to Apple Podcasts, I'll make sure to shout it out on the show. Of course, simple ratings are also appreciated. If you're here on YouTube, of course, feel free to hit the like button and say hi below. I read all the comments. And with that, safe travels, friend. I'll see you all next time at the Crimson Hour. Good night, y'all.